Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Or should I say morning or afternoon, depending on your time zone and where you're listening from. Today we are going to start the reading of Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles. It's the interview with the vampire Lestat, the Queen of the Damned. In preparing for this video, I saw that the interview with the vampire actually isn't divided into chapters in the standard method. So this first video is going to cover... There are two different spots I could stop at. There's page 10 and then there's page 20. I think I'm going to stop at page 10 for this first video. Read to page 20 for the second. And then there's an actual break in text for... Seems to be a scene shift on page 34. So the third video will go to page 34. Without further ado, let's get through this copyright page and get on to it. I hope you're all prepared. This is a Borzoi book, published by Alfred A. Knopf, Inc. Interview with a Vampire, copyright 1976, by Anne O'Brien Rice. The Vampire Lestat, copyright 1985 by Anne O'Brien Rice. The Queen of the Damned, copyright 1988 by Anne O'Brien Rice. All rights reserved under international and Pan-American copyright conventions. Published in the United States by Alfred A. Knopf, Inc., New York, and simultaneously in Canada by Random House of Canada Limited, Toronto. Distributed by Random House, Inc., New York. Portions of The Vampire Lestat originally appeared in the Twilight Zone magazine. Poems by Stan Rice quoted in The Queen of the Damned were originally published in Some Lamb by Stan Rice, copyright 1975 by Stan Rice. Published by The Figures, reprinted by permission of Stan Rice. White Boy by Stan Rice, copyright 1976 by Stan Rice. Published by Mudra, reprinted by permission of Stan Rice. Body of Work by Stan Rice, copyright 1983 by Stan Rice, reprinted by permission of Lost Roads Publishers. Untitled Poem by Stan Rice in The Queen of the Damned, copyright 1988 by Stan Rice. Library of Congress information available upon request. ISBN-13:978-0-307-29165-3. I read that in case y'all want to look up the book by its ISBN so that you can purchase your own copy of the book. Hand lettering by Iskra Design. Cover design by Joe Orbrowski and Mada Design. Printed in China. With a lot number of 987654. Interview with the Vampire. A little information about the author. Anne Rice was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. She holds a Master of Arts degree in creative writing from San Francisco State University and is the author of over 27 books. Her first novel, Interview with the Vampire, was published in 1976 and has gone on to become one of the best-selling novels of all time, and currently lives in Rancho Mirage, California. Dedication for the book for Stan Rice, Carol Malkin, and Alice O'Brien Brochard. I see, said the vampire thoughtfully, and slowly he walked across the room towards the window. For a long time he stood there against the dim light from Divisadero Street and the passing beams of traffic. The boy could see the furnishings of the room more clearly now. The round oak table, the chairs, a wash basin hung on one wall with a mirror. He set his briefcase on the table and waited. "But how much tape do you have with you?" asked the vampire, turning now so the boy could see his profile. "Enough for the story of a life?" "Sure, if it's a good life. Sometimes I interview as many as 3 or 4 people in a night. If I'm lucky. But it has to be a good story." "That's only fair, isn't it?" "Admirably fair," the vampire answered. "I would like to tell you the story of my life, then. I would like to do that very much." "Great," said the boy, and quickly he removed the small tape recorder from his briefcase, making a check of the cassette and the batteries. "I'm really anxious to hear why you believe this, why you—" "No," said the vampire abruptly. "We can't begin that way. Is your equipment ready?" "Yes," said the boy. "Then sit down. I'm going to turn on the overhead light." "But I thought vampires didn't like the light," said the boy. "If you think the dark adds to the atmosphere—" But then he stopped. The vampire was watching him with his back to the window. The boy could make out nothing of his face now, and something about the still figure there distracted him. He started to say something again, but he said nothing. Then he sighed with relief when the vampire moved towards the table and reached for the overhead cord. At once the room was flooded with a harsh yellow light, and the boy, staring up at the vampire, could not repress a gasp. His fingers danced backwards on the table to grasp the edge. "Dear God," he whispered, and then he gazed speechless at the vampire. The vampire was utterly white and smooth, as if he were sculpted from bleached bone, and his face was seemingly inanimate as a statue, except for 2 brilliant green eyes that looked down at the boy intently like flames in a skull. But then the vampire smiled almost wistfully, and with smooth white substance of his face moved with the infinitely flexible but minimal lines of a cartoon. "Do you see?" he asked softly. The boy shuddered, lifting his hand as if to shield himself from a powerful light. His eyes moved slowly over the finely tailored black coat he had only glimpsed in the bar, the long folds of the cape, the black silk tie knotted at the throat, the gleam of white collar that was as white as the vampire's flesh. He stared at the vampire's full black hair, the waves that were combed back over the tips of his ears, the curls that barely touched the edge of the white collar. "Now, do you still want the interview?" the vampire asked. The boy's mouth was open before the sound came out. He was nodding. Then he said, "Yes." The vampire sat down slowly opposite him and, leaning forward, said gently, confidently, "Don't be afraid. Just start the tape." And then he reached out over the length of the table. The boy recoiled, sweat running down the sides of his face. The vampire clamped a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Believe me, I won't hurt you. I want this opportunity. It's more important to me than you realize now. I want you to begin." And he withdrew his hand and sat collected, waiting. It took a moment for the boy to wipe his forehead and his lips with a handkerchief, to stammer that the microphone was in the machine, to press the button, to say the machine was on. "You weren't always a vampire, were you?" he began. "No," answered the vampire. "I was a 25-year-old man when I became a vampire, and the year was 1791. The boy was startled by the preciseness of the date, and he repeated it before he asked, "How did it come about?" "There's a simple answer to that." "I don't believe I want to give simple answers," said the vampire. "I think I want to tell the real story." "Yes," said the boy quickly. He was folding his handkerchief over and wiping his lips now with it again. "There was a tragedy," the vampire started. "It was my younger brother. He died." And then he stopped, so that the boy cleared his throat and wiped his face again before stuffing the handkerchief almost impatiently into his pocket. "It's not painful, is it?" he asked timidly. "Does it seem so?" asked the vampire. "No," he shook his head. "It's simply that I've only told this story to one other person, and that was so long ago. No, it's not painful. We were living in Louisiana then. We'd received a land grant and settled in 2 indigo plantations on the Mississippi, very near New Orleans." "Ah, that's the accent," the boy said softly. For a moment the vampire stared blankly. "I have an accent?" He began to laugh. And the boy, flustered, answered quickly, "I noticed it in the bar when I asked you what you did for a living. It's just a slight sharpness of the consonants." That should have been muted. "That's all." "I never guessed it was French." "It's all right. the vampire assured him. "I'm not as shocked as I pretended to be. It's only that I forgot it from time to time. But let me go on." "Please," said the boy. "I was talking about the plantations. They had a great deal to do with it. Really, my becoming a vampire. But I'll come to that. Our life there was both luxurious and primitive, and we ourselves found it extremely attractive. You see, we lived far better there than we could have ever lived in France. Perhaps the sheer wilderness of Louisiana only made it seem so, but seeming so it was. I remember the imported furniture that cluttered the house," the vampire smiled, "and the harpsichord. That was lovely. My sister used to play it. On summer evenings, she would sit at the keys with her back to the open French windows, and I can still remember that thin, rapid music, and the vision of the swamp rising beyond her, the moss-hung cypresses floating along against the sky. And there were the sounds of the swamp, a chorus of creatures, the cry of the birds. I think we loved it. It made the rosewood furniture all the more precious, the music more delicate and desirable. Even when the wisteria tore the shutters off the attic windows and worked its tendrils right into the whitewashed brick in less than a year. Yes, we loved it. All except my brother. I don't think I ever heard him complain of anything, but I knew how he felt. My father was dead then, and I was head of the family. I had to defend him constantly from my mother and sister. They wanted to take him visiting and to New Orleans for parties, but he hated these things. I think he stopped going altogether before he was 12. Prayer was what mattered to him. Prayer and his leather-bound lives of the saints. Finally, I built him an oratory removed from the house and began to spend most of every day there, often early evening. It was ironic, really. He was so different from us, so different from everyone, and I was so regular. There was nothing extraordinary about me whatsoever, the vampire smiled. Sometimes in the evening I would go out to him and find him in the garden near the oratory, sitting absolutely composed on a stone bench there. And I'd tell him my troubles, the difficulties I had with the slaves, how I distrusted the overseer, or the weather, or my brokers, all the problems that made up the length and breadth of my existence. And he would listen, making only a few comments, always sympathetic, so that when I left him, I had the distinct impression that he had solved everything for me. I didn't think I could deny him anything, and I vowed that no matter how it would break my heart to lose him, he could enter the priesthood when the time came. Of course, I was wrong. The vampire stopped. For a moment the boy only gazed at him, and then he started as if awakened from deep thought. He flourished as he could not find the right words. No, he floundered as he could not find the right words. Ah! He didn't want to be a priest? The boy asked. The vampire studied him as if trying to discern the meaning of his expression. Then he said, I meant that I was wrong about myself, about my not denying him anything. His eyes moved over the far wall and fixed on panes of the windows. He began to see visions. Real visions? The boy asked, but again there was a hesitation, as if he were thinking of something else. I didn't think so, the vampire answered. It happened when he was 15. He was very handsome then. He had the smoothest skin and the largest blue eyes. He was robust, not thin as I am now, and was then, but his eyes. It was as if when I looked into his eyes, I was standing alone on the edge of the world, on a windswept ocean beach. There was nothing but the soft roar of the waves. Well, he said, his eyes still fixed on the window panes. He began to see visions. He only hinted at this at first, and he stopped taking his meals altogether. He lived in the oratory. At any hour of the day or night, I could find him on the bare flagstones, kneeling before the altar. And the oratory itself was neglected. He stopped tending to the candles, or changing the altar clothes, or even sweeping out the leaves. One night I became really alarmed when I stood in the rose arbor, watching him for 1 solid hour, during which he never moved from his knees, never once lowered his arms, which he held outstretched in the form of a cross. The slaves all thought he was mad. The vampire raised his eyebrows in wonder. I was convinced that he was only overzealous, that in his love for God he had perhaps gone too far. Then he told me about the visions. Both Saint Dominic and the Blessed Virgin Mary had come to him in the oratory. They had told him he was to sell all our property in Louisiana, everything we owned, and use the money to do God's work in France. My brother was to be a great religious leader, to return the country to its former fervor, to turn the tide against atheism and the revolution. Of course, he had no money of his own. I was to sell the plantations and our townhouses in New Orleans and give the money to him. Again the vampire stopped. The boy sat motionless, regarding him astonished. Excuse me, he whispered. What did you say? Did you sell the plantations? No, said the vampire, his face calm as it had been from the start. I laughed at him, and he became incensed. He insisted his command came from the Virgin herself. Who was I to disregard it? Who indeed? He asked softly, as if he were thinking of this again. Who indeed? And the more he tried to convince me, the more I laughed. It was nonsense, I told him, the product of an immature and even morbid mind. The oratory was a mistake, I said to him. I would have it torn down at once. He would go on to school in New Orleans and get such inane notions out of his head. I don't remember all that I said, but I remember the feeling. Behind all this contemptuousness, behind all this contemptuous dismissal on my part was a smoldering anger and a disappointment. I was bitterly disappointed. I didn't believe him at all. But that's understandable, the boy said quickly when the vampire paused, his expression of astonishment softening. I mean, would anyone have believed him? Is it so understandable? The vampire looked at the boy. I think perhaps it was vicious egotism. Let me explain. I loved my brother, as I told you, and at times I believed him to be a living saint. I encouraged him in his prayer and his meditations, as I said, and I was willing to give him up to the priesthood. And if someone told me of a saint in Arles or Lourdes who saw visions, I would have believed it. I was a Catholic. I believed in saints. I lit tapers before their marble statues in churches. I knew their pictures, their symbols, their names. But I couldn't believe my brother. Not only did I not believe he saw visions, I couldn't entertain the notion for a moment. Now, why? Because he was my brother. Holy he might be, peculiar most definitely. But Francis of Assisi? No, not my brother. No brother of mine could be such. That is egotism. Do you see? The boy thought about it before he answered, and then he nodded and said that, yes, he thought he did. Perhaps he saw the visions, said the vampire. Then you don't claim to know now whether he did or not? No, but I do know that he never wavered in his conviction for a second. That I know now and knew then the night he left my room crazed and grieved. He never wavered for an instant, and within minutes he was dead. How? The boy asked. He simply walked out the French doors onto the gallery and stood for a moment at the head of the brick stairs. And then he fell. He was dead when I reached the bottom, his neck broken. The vampire shook his head in consternation, but his face was still serene. Did you see him fall? Asked the boy. Did he lose his footing? No. But two of the servants saw it happen. They said that he looked up as if he had just seen something in the air. Then his entire body moved forward as if being swept by a wind. One of them said he was about to say something when he fell. I thought that he was about to say something too, but it was at that moment I turned away from the window. My back was turned when I heard the noise. He glanced at the tape recorder. I could not forgive myself. I felt responsible for this death, he said, and everyone else seemed to think I was responsible also. But how could they? You said they saw him fall. It wasn't a direct accusation. They simply knew that something had passed between us that was unpleasant, that we had argued minutes before the fall. The servants had heard us. My mother had heard us. My mother would not stop asking me what had happened and why my brother, who was so quiet, had been shouting. Then my sister joined in, and of course I refused to say. I was so bitterly shocked and miserable that I had no patience for anyone. Only the vague determination they would not know about his visions. They would not know what he had become. Finally, not a saint, but only a fanatic. My sister went to bed rather than face the funeral. My mother told everyone in the parish that something horrible had happened in my room, which I would not reveal, and even the police questioned me, on the word of my own mother. Finally, the priest came to see me and demanded to know what had gone on. I told no one. It was only a discussion, I said. I was not on the gallery when he fell, I protested, and they all stared at me as if I'd killed him, and I felt that I'd killed him. I sat in the parlor beside his coffin for 2 days thinking, I have killed him. I stared at his face until spots appeared before my eyes, and I nearly fainted. The back of his skull had been shattered on the pavement, and his head had the wrong shape on the pillow. I forced myself to stare at it, to study it simply because I could hardly endure the pain and the smell of decay. And I was tempted over and over to try to open his eyes. All these were mad thoughts, mad impulses. The main thought was this. I had laughed at him. I had not believed him. I had not been kind to him. He had fallen because of me. This really happened, didn't it? The boy whispered. You're telling me something that's true. Yes, said the vampire, looking at him without surprise. I want to go on telling you. But his eyes passed over the boy and returned to the window. He showed only faint interest in the boy, who seemed engaged in some silent inner struggle. But you said you didn't know about the visions. that you, a vampire, didn't know for certain whether. I want to take things in order, said the vampire. I want to go on telling you things as they happened. No, I don't know about the visions to this day. And again he waited until the boy said, Yes, please. Please go on. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to stop there on the bottom of page 10. The next video will come in at the top of page 11. I hope you've enjoyed the video. And I do apologize for my stuttering and the few misreads that I have done. But overall, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that my imperfections to the story bring more human quality to it and show you that this is not an AI reading as many stories are done now, but an actual person taking the time and sharing their interests and hoping to spread a fantastic work of literature to people who either have or have not read or heard it before. Thank you all for joining me, and I will see you in the next recording.